Welcome back to Driving Success, the award-winning FleetVantage podcast, a show where we bring you expert insights in the latest trends in fleet management and transportation. I'm your host, Tracy Derival, and today we are doing something a little different. We are excited to bring you a special crossover episode with FleetOwner, featuring a roundtable discussion with industry leaders on one of the biggest questions facing organizations today. How should they navigate changing EPA 2027 regulations, pre-buy planning, and long-term truck lifecycle strategy? Joining the conversation are FleetOwner's editor, Jeremy Wolfe, Fleet Maintenance Editor-in-Chief, John Hinch, Brian Antonellis, who is our Senior VP of Fleet Operations, and Mac Hudson, who is our Senior Offlease Manager here at FleetAdvantage. Let's get into the episode.
To get a little bit more background on FleetAdvantage, Mac or Brian, could you tell us a little bit about what the company does if a listener has never heard of you guys?
Sure. So FleetAdvantage is a asset management company. We have 36,000 vehicles under management. And what we do is we work with the top 100 private fleets. So we do business with the top 37 out of the top 100. And we're really focused on a couple of key areas. One is making their fleet as efficient as possible and making sure that they're executing on the total lowest cost of ownership. And we do that in a couple different ways. We do it by managing their data and digging into their data. And I think there's a couple of topics we're going to dig into here today that kind of focus on that. And then we take and we make the challenging parts of getting new equipment and navigating selling equipment really easy for our customers.
And Brian, I believe you have over 2 decades of experience in the transportation industry. Is that right?
Yeah, you're making me feel old. But so I started out and I worked with Pepsi and Coca-Cola for 20 years, running fleets with them. For the last 5 years, I've been here as the Senior Vice President of Fleet Operations for FleetAdvantage. And for us, we look at it and it's the stuff that's really connected to the assets. It's about making sure we spec the asset correctly. Our customer has a great experience with the asset, and then we sell it correctly at the end.
And Brian was in that Super Bowl commercial with Coke and Pepsi from the 90s, if you remember that.
Yeah, I don't think I was, right? Back in the 90s, I was in a garage somewhere looking through oil filters to make sure we had the correct stock in order. But I wish I got to do cool stuff like that when I worked for those guys.
And Mac, what are you up to? I think you got your start in transportation with Kenco Logistics Services at a warehouse, if I scanned your LinkedIn profile correctly.
Yeah. So I started kind of with the supply chain background and joined Kenco. Had an internship there, and then jumped around to a few different companies, Damco Distribution Services, and then worked for Under Armour at their new facility in Nashville. And then about 2017, I joined Dollar General, joined their transportation team, kind of made the leap into the transportation space. And haven't looked back. So at Dollar General, I worked for their private fleet, helped kind of get them set up and running, worked specifically kind of on their capital planning side. So I did a lot of work with truck purchases, trailer purchases, kind of capital management and planning, things like that. So worked with them for about 7 years, and then in the last year and a half joined Brian and his team at FleetAdvantage. And right now I'm working on the off-lease side, so supporting our customers with making sure that they get their trucks off lease in a quick and timely manner, and make sure it's easy for them. So,
John, I know you, but our listeners might not know your experience on this industry. Could you tell us how you got your start? I think it was with FleetOwner in 2019.
Yes, my first foray into trucking was with FleetOwner in 2019. Went there a couple of years, and now I run Fleet Maintenance Magazine, which is the other side of the coin to FleetOwner, where we deal with everything that can save you uptime. And I've talked to Brian a lot of times. Actually, in our July issue, he helped us out with our tire evaluation story. So thanks again, Brian, for that. But yeah, really excited to have the conversation today, Jeremy. So thanks for having me on.
And I started with FleetOwner 2 years ago. I don't really have much of an impressive resume to riff off of, but I'm really glad to be talking with you guys today to benefit from your expertise at the very least. Talking about truck lifecycle management, I think a good place to start is the massive headline that just came out about a week ago, the NOx rule. What's going on with that?
Okay, Jeremy. So everyone knows, or should know, about the 2027 low nitrous oxide rule that was essentially started at the end of 2022, finalized in 2023, and something that people have been dreading for the last 3 years, whether it's a fleet that's worried that they might have to pay upwards of $20,000 or $30,000 extra because of these new, more complicated engines, which, you know, at the end of the day, they just have to be 82.5% more efficient than the previous version. So, along with getting rid of more NOx, which I think everyone can agree is a good thing, the EPA wanted the manufacturers to also extend the warranty period. So from 5 years, 100,000, from 100,000 miles to 450,000 miles. And then the useful life requirements, it really depends on, if it's heavy or medium, severe service kind of stuff. But really at the high end, I believe it's, useful life of 11 years, 650,000 miles, or 32,000 engine hours rather. So what EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin announced last week at the Great American Fair was they're going to keep the nitrous oxide levels. So that's 35 milligrams per horsepower brake hour during normal operation. But the big thing is the warranty, useful life stuff. That is all going to be either going away or delayed. So the useful life stuff, that was deferred to 2030. The administration is saying that's going to save upwards of $12 billion because of all the extra fees and stuff that the OEMs were going to pass down to the customers.
I mean, when I think about that, if you think of the projections we had a couple of years ago, right? We were saying the cost of a truck was going to go up between $20,000 and $25,000, and there was two components that made that up. 50% of that cost was the actual technology and software enhancements to the truck, and about 50% was this warranty and useful life. And for a while, they talked about an 8-year, 800,000 mile warranty, and where people were buying 4-year 450 or 5-year 500. Now it was a significant jump, and that cost increase of 25,000. While no one's going to be excited to see a $12,000 or $10,000 cost increase, I think everybody's going to be very excited not to see a $25,000 cost increase as we go into next year. And I think that will give the truck OEMs some time to sort of drive down some of the cost. And if the new target is 2030, we'll continue to see it advance. And it's exciting that all the OEMs have trucks that meet that threshold today. There's nobody that's going to be on the sideline that can't sell trucks next year. So I feel like it was a good compromise. And I think it gives everybody the ability to take it in a couple of small doses, a little bit next year. And then we'll see what happens by the time we get to 2030. But it gives everybody a chance without a $25,000 sticker shock.
Now, Brian, I had one quick question. I believe Cummins also announced recently some of their engines are going to be, the NOx engines are going to be delayed till like mid-year 27. Did you see that?
Yeah, so I think they're playing that middle point around what they have for carb credits today, when they want to roll it out, right? If you remember, for a while, Cummins was going to pull those forward, so they were actually going to release the 27 model year engines in 26 and try to build up some credits for going early. I think with holding to the 35 milligram and some of the changes on the warranty piece, I felt like they think they can get to mid 27 and let some of the technology refine itself.
And there was probably no accident that the three OEMs that are already with the DEF inducements and are very close with the industry or with the administration, Cummins, PACCAR, and Daimler Truck North America, they were all on the dais with Zeldin, and they're the ones announcing all this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the concerns we had a couple of years ago, oh my goodness, will we be able to get engines? And if you really have to go back to the beginning of 24, when California, and before they got rid of CARB, right? California was going to go live with the 27 emission standards in 24, and that was really hard. So we saw a couple of things happen. We saw prices jumped through the roof. We also saw limited availability. At that point, Cummins didn't have an engine, so they'd have to use carb credits to even enter California. The S13 from International hadn't passed yet, so International didn't really have an offering unless you were going to go. But you could see how it was going to be very painful for a majority of the OEMs to be able to meet those targets in 24. And I think by pausing, putting a hold on carb, we're going to end up in a great place in 27 where everybody has an engine that's going to be able to run. The cost is going to be reasonable because they're splitting the warranty and putting it into, sort of a little bit in 2030 and a little bit now. And, a lot of the fears that we saw, except for the cost increase, which we've seen that happen, a lot of those have kind of been resolved. And there was a time when people said, oh my goodness, we're never going to be able to run a truck in 27. And I've reminded everybody that we're in one of the most resilient industries in this country. Whether it's, engine challenges, OEM challenges, tariffs, price increases, right? Regardless of what hits this industry, it's always there to support itself. They always work through it. And, once again, I think the industry should be proud that they're finding a solution that reduced the emission targets and did it in a way where nobody likes the $10,000 increase to $12,000 increase, but it's somewhat manageable going into 27.
And Mac, I had a question for you. On the high level, the administration is saying like this giant number of $12 billion saved. Just from the private fleet perspective, taking Dollar General, for example, when your margins are so low, and obviously the products you're selling something you want to provide a really good value for the customers. When these trucks are increasing, $20,000-$30,000 possibly, what's that really doing for the whole operation and being passed down to not only the consumers but those truck drivers too, and all of that, like just the compensation and everything that goes into it.
Yeah, I think really what it boils down to is you've got to make sure that you're planning correctly, right? I know that this hasn't been exactly a big secret for a long time. I think back to the COVID days, right? Kind of how all of that was coming down the pipe, and then 2022, 2023, 2024, all of these kind of emission standards that we're going to be changing. So it's not like it's a big surprise, so to say, but I think the best thing that we were able to do, and I know a lot of other companies and private fleets has done, is really kind of taking that forward projecting look and kind of work around that plan. So if you can pull some of it forward, some companies have done that. If you can replace some trucks that make sense to be replaced early, they go ahead and kind of pull that trigger maybe a little bit earlier than they would have otherwise. But ultimately, it's something like Brian said, you've kind of got to be resilient. You've got to be able to work around the challenges. And at the end of the day, you're going to have to deliver, in kind of my case at Dollar General, when we were there, the customers are still going to need that low price point because that's, who they rely on and what they rely on and what they can afford. So it just kind of speaks to the planning and being able to look ahead and really your life cycle management and kind of that whole total cost of ownership outlook and how you can really kind of implement that and kind of work it around a budget in these cost increases.
So you have to be, the fleet managers have to be a lot more creative and proactive so you don't have to change your name to $2 General.
That's right. That's right.
So John, I know you work with a lot of fleets on the maintenance side. How are they dealing with the challenges from the technology change in the equipment? I mean, the DPFs changed fairly radically. We've seen some trucks go to 24 volt. And have you seen a lot of concerns from a training perspective or trying to get their technicians up to speed?
Well, I guess in this case, we don't know what we don't know. Obviously, when you buy a new truck, it's going to be covered for the warranty for, at least the first couple of years, right? So the dealer training, I'm sure, is really, going in earnest right now. All of the fleet and independent shops that I've talked to really it's not quite on their radar. Oftentimes I find with maintenance, if it's not a direct problem now, they're not really thinking about it too much. And it kind of reminds me. So I just was looking at some studies from ASC, the ATMC training survey that they did, where I believe it's like 80% or so of dealer techs are really happy with their training, or I'm sorry, it's 72% for that. And then for the automotive side, it's like an independent side rather, it's like 55%. And then for the fleet side, it was only 45% were really satisfied with their training. So if that kind of tells you something, dealers have that connection to the OEMs, so they're going to be on this. If you go to, I think you could also group in a lot of the large third party providers as well. But for the aftermarket, no one's going to be going to them right now. Like within 6 months, hey, my 48-volt heater is got some faults, and we don't know what's going on with it. And another thing, I did talk to the Daimler engineers in February about the new Detroit 13-liter, and they seem pretty confident that a lot of the changes that they've made are going to improve the maintenance as well. So I wasn't around in 2010 and for certain unpopular after treatment systems that came out that shall not be named. But everyone is gun shy, and they kind of have some bad memories about the SCRs and the DPFs and all of that stuff at the beginning. But hopefully, optimistically, speaking here, everyone learned their lessons from that and put extra due diligence into making sure, 4 months down the line, you don't have all of these beautiful new trucks that are, on the side of the road, broken down. Yeah.
It was funny because you look back at the work we've been doing for the last year, and the term pre-buy was thrown around for a long time, and then it wasn't going to happen, and then it was going to happen, and really it happened. We're essentially sold out right now. Do dealers have some slots left in for availability right now? Sure. Right? You're going to see the price point in those slots start to increase here fairly dramatically. But the large fleets have ordered what they've ordered. It would be very hard to put in a 200 or 300 truck order at this point. The capacity is simply not there. But you think about the pre-buy did occur. We're fairly sold out. But one of the key points we hit on was, and Mac talked a little bit about it around planning. So when we were talking about 27, I don't think it was buy all your 27 trucks in 26. That was never the message we were sending or that we were advocating to our customers. It was about finding a blend. And one of the areas we wanted to find a blend was around the technician training. So if you're a large fleet and you were going to take in 1,000 trucks, you didn't want to take in 1,000 trucks, put them in 5 locations, not have a strong training base, and hope you had good reliability numbers. What you wanted to do was look at it from a 26, 27, 28, figure out what trucks you could pull forward into 26, get some experience with some of that technology that's already rolled out, right? I mean, some of your OEMs have already moved to that 24-volt system. Some of them already have their 13-liter set up to meet and pass regulations. You could get a sample size of it, and then to sort of have that blend. And, for the customers that executed on that, we're seeing that they're getting some learnings in 26 with the new technology, but they feel fairly comfortable in 27. Where they're sending those vehicles out to, we made sure we thought about reliability, right? And then some of them that were a little bit lower miles, you're going to push out to 28. So, we kind of learned during COVID, you have to be flexible. You have to, towards the end of a life of a truck, the cost curves are going to be a little bit different, and your MPG savings is going to be a little bit different, but you got to have flexibility when you're going through those challenges. And I think a lot of the large fleets did. So I think that's why the industry feels like it's in a fairly good position.
And talking about the pre-buy in 2024 was very, very different than talking about it today. I mean, so much has changed. Flexibility really is the name of it, isn't it? CARB's rules got shot down by federal lawmakers. EPA's GHG3 got kicked to the side of the road, and now NOx is very different in its warranty requirements. And even getting rid of the EFD rates is very, very possible for the final rule whenever that comes for model year 2027 vehicles. I feel like it could be somewhat a little bit easier to live with some of the new models, assuming DEFD rates don't get taken out of current equipment in a separate rulemaking.
I agree with you. I think that, if you look back, CARB set the standard of where they wanted to be. EPA at the time was following along, so they would both align in 27. And over that, 3-year period, as we've moved from 24 towards 27, people have seen some of the speed bumps coming and they've adjusted, right? And yeah, I mean, listen, the pre-buy still happened because nobody wants to pay an extra $12,000 for a truck next year that you could get delivered in Q4 this year. That's why we're sold out. I mean, all the talk and all we want to look at it. That's the reason why it happened. But I think there's some real value that came out of it. EPA moderated, CARB went away. We still maintained a lower NOx, which was what everybody hoped to achieve anyways. Nobody wants a dirty engine polluting going down the road. So we ended up with a lower emitting engine. We did it in a way where people were able to, if they planned correctly, shield themselves from the cost increase, blend it over a couple years, and then have those learnings from a technician standpoint and from a fleet standpoint to adapt the technology over a period of time. It's going to be interesting as we move towards 2030. Once we put this behind us, right, what do? We start the planning process all over again to make sure that in 2030, we're understanding the cost increases, managing it, and setting up our plans. I mean, in this world where a truck's going to be $200,000, planning out 3 to 5 years on a typical life cycle, we're into the 2030 planning now.
It's the rinse and repeat.
That's it.
And you and I have talked a lot about that 500,000 mile mark, right, for maintenance, where you can remind me what the exact percentage is, but maintenance goes up a lot per mile past that threshold. And it seems like this part of the rule would help the actual trucker, if you own the truck, to save maintenance money down the line if it is like an extra 3-4 years that it has to last. We're talking $6,000 in savings for a truck, but it seems like the trucker might, over the course of the vehicle, save more than $6,000 because they pay less maintenance in that, like, let's say 8-year window.
Yeah.
And does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It doesn't really change the economics. There's the difference between the economic obsolescence of a truck and then the functional obsolescence of a truck. Everybody knows you can get a truck to run 1 million miles. You can go to any truck stop and you can find someone that has 1 million miles on it, right? But when you look at the cost curve, and there's 2 main cost curves we look at. First one is fuel. So if your truck today is getting, 7 miles per gallon, and over the next 4 or 5 years at going through its life cycle, that's going to improve about 2% a year. So 4 or 5 years down the road, your truck's going to be getting 10% worse fuel economy than a new truck. That's really what the GHG mandate pushed on the industry, right? You can reduce NOx and you can do all these things. The only way you can reduce your carbon footprint is to burn less fuel. So if your truck compares to a truck 5 years from now, it's going to be 10% less efficient. If you look at the natural efficiency of an engine, after about 4 or 5 years, it starts to degrade. So you're not even getting the 7 miles per gallon you were getting when it was new. You start to get 6.9.5, 6.9, 6.8, and the new trucks have increased. So you have this gap, and it becomes this gap of, somewhere between 8 and 11% over 5 years. And for a tractor trailer running hundreds of thousands of miles a year, that can be, tens of thousands of dollars a year increased cost to run an older truck, right? And then you look at the maintenance curve. You start in year 1 and you're $0.015 or 2 cents a mile on 100,000 miles a year. So it's $2,000 a year to run the truck. By the time you get to year 3, you're probably somewhere between 5 to 7 cents a mile. That's $5,000 to $7,000. By the time you get to year 5, you start to see this real explosion. Why? Technology that they've put on these trucks starts to fail, right? We've seen everything they've put on it, but you're somewhere around 13 to 17 cents a mile. So running a new truck, you're paying $2,000 a year. Running a 5 or 6 year old truck, you're paying 13 to 17 cents a mile, or $13,000 to $17,000 a year. That's a huge increase, right? So yes, trucks can run longer, and they can go ahead and set the useful life or the functional life of that truck to whatever they want. And they can set a warranty that goes along with that truck. And if it gets paid at the beginning, you can offset some of those costs. But it's not going to change the core of the matter is the truck, it becomes economically obsolete somewhere around that 500,000 miles. And fleets can do some great work. They can get preventive with a lot of their repairs, right? So they're bringing them in, they're doing their oil changes, they're looking at parts. They can get predictive where they take data. And we see AI coming in today and helping people manage data like they've never managed it before. At Fleet Advantage, we have a portal called Atlas. It's our proprietary portal to capture data and become predictive, right? You can do those types of things, and you can change when the end of that economic life of that truck is going to be. But you're absolutely right. It's not going to change the fact that if you're running up to 1 million miles, you're going to pay for that truck and maintenance probably 10 times more than whether there was a 10% increase in the warranty cost, right? I think they wanted the warranties to stay robust, because if you look today, I'm not sure that with the large carriers and large private fleets, they do a great job on maintenance. But as they move into that secondary life and they move into that sometimes the 500,000 to 800,000 mile, without a warranty, many of those truckers just don't take the time to make the repairs on the emission systems. So you start to see an increase in emissions as the truck ages. And they were hoping that putting that warranty there would make it easier for truck owners to be compliant towards the end of the useful life of the truck. And it's been a lot. I mean, you think back through what we've been through, and you think about in 2020, we only made about 180,000 trucks as an industry. And then we couldn't get caught back up in 2021 because we had supply chain challenges that lingered really into early 2023. Then we finally got caught back up and satisfied the demand that was out there. And then we head right into sort of another major event in the industry, which is this regulatory change, right? Mac on our side, he's bringing back trucks now that were built during COVID, and it's amazing. I mean, Mac, is the demand still holding on those COVID era trucks where the supply was low at that point?
Yeah, so I mean, if you think about it, we're lapping where we were for COVID right now, and all those kind of, like you talked about, the production challenges, kind of the low manufacturing rate, trucks coming out. So trucks are starting to come back, but it's, inventory is a bit low, right? So the sleeper market's extremely low. So really kind of the used truck market in general is kind of in a good spot right now, just because of that, those kind of ups and downs of 2021, 2022. And that's kind of really playing into the inventory and what we're seeing right now on the backside.
And another major industry disruption was, how the for-hire market was doing. I think that influenced a lot of fleets' buying decisions. When the market took a turn in, was it November or December of 2025? Finally, after all these years of analysts saying it's about to turn, it finally does. And you could see the number of truck orders from the monthly estimates by Act Research and FTR just spike upwards. And last month's numbers, June's orders for 2026 was 230% over 2025's. It seems like a lot of fleets were really hurting for cash, and the increase in spot rates finally really motivated them to push demand upward.
Oh, you're right. And I think it came at the perfect time. And it happened at a time where, okay, they got a little bit more cash in their pocket. They were able to buy trucks, because I think a lot of them were concerned that if they weren't able to buy in 26, you talked about the economics earlier, John, with Mac around Dollar General. But if you weren't able to make a purchase this year, it's going to be 5% higher cost next year. And nobody wanted that, right? So the fact to see that in that industry bounce back was fantastic. But it's amazing if you go back and look at the cyclical nature of the new and used truck market. I mean, you can go back 20 years, and when you're as good as you can be, you're going to go down equally as bad over the next 2 or 3 years, and then it sort of just continues to rebound and come back and forth. And I think what really threw everything out was the prolonged negative time that the for-hire trucks went through was the offset of the positive times they had with COVID. I mean, they were making a ton of money during COVID. Spot rates were running up. Everybody was running out to buy a truck. All the large carriers were trying to grab owner operators to add to their capacity. And as good as it was, it went down equally as bad. And I think it rebounded at the right time. And when I think about the moderation we've seen on the regulations for 27, I think what that's going to do is take some of the peak out of the next spike. So we're probably, if they had left it as a $20,000 price increase for next year and kept the warranties in place, we probably would have seen a larger pre-buy, but there would have been even a more dramatic pullback next year. And I think moderating the regulation is going to help moderate the next cycle that we go through, so it won't be as dramatic as COVID was.
Brian, do you think that there could be a point, because we always talk about how trucking's cyclical and we have these highs and lows and, making hay while the sun shines kind of mentality that a lot of truckers have. Maybe with technology and just experience and all that, could we get to a point where, those huge ebbs and flows could be a little more gentle?
I think we were there. If you go back and look at like 2013 through 2019, while maybe it wasn't the best time for truck production, it was a lot more subtle, right? You had some good times, you had some bad times, but it wasn't as dramatic. I think we're going back into that pattern here over the next 10 years, as long as we don't have a dramatic regulatory change, regardless of what side you land on. We started this thing off by just kind of talking about ACT and where the state of EV was, and we were talking on a few of those topics, but we had severe or extreme regulatory change, right? From 2016 to 2020 to 2024. And, hopefully we start to see some moderation in that regulatory environment, which I think will bring some consistency to the market and then ultimately help some of these businesses smooth out the ebbs and flows. Because the great thing is when you're in that traditional market or that traditional cadence of being up and down, you can start to predict it. You know where it's going to be. You know what drives us up. You know what drives us down. And you can watch some of the metrics that are coming out around, how many trucks are in the industry, how many are being used, how many are idle, who's buying trucks, who's cutting back trucks, and you can make a pretty good prediction. So I'm hopeful that we're returning back to a more stable market than we've seen over the last 8 years or so.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that, where it's, you think about, like Brian said, all the kind of regulatory milestones that they were asking the truck industry to hit. And then also between that and COVID, it was just like, seems like it was kind of hit after hit. So it seems like there's a little bit of consistency right now of, okay, kind of evening out, like Brian said, kind of maybe pushing out some of those requirements to 2030, whenever it is, and then allowing kind of everybody to maybe take this a little bit smaller step at a time. So hopefully that kind of evens things out or evens the playing field in the long term.
It'll be good for everybody, right? More consistency. I mean, we talk about regulatory and we're talking about the NOx emission systems. I mean, just think about even before that, just rolling out an ELD program. And then, from a litigation standpoint, all the new cameras, the new technology. I was looking back the other day, and a sleeper in 2019, 2020 had a price point somewhere around for a large customer that gets some good value when they buy, right? You were looking somewhere in the 125 to 130 range. A similar customer could be in the 175s to 185s, and with the increase next year, they're going to be close to 200,000. I mean, for a really large carrier, I mean, a $200,000 truck is going to be the reality next year.
And so it sounds like what all this does is puts a lot of pressure on the fleets to save money in other areas, because obviously the trucks are going to cost what the trucks cost. So, Brian, are you seeing them do any kind of more creative things using technology, whether it's, advanced driver assistance systems where maybe you can cut down on your accidents and save there, or monitor fuel usage? Because one thing, not to get on a soapbox or anything here, but if everyone says that fuel, like MPG is, 30% of it's controlled by drivers, and then we're putting all of this effort into just changing the engines when we could just change the behaviors of the drivers, not have to do many physical changes. That seems kind of common sense, but you can do that with technology. So the fleets can be empowered to save money that way. So yes, you're spending, let's say $10,000-$15,000 extra on the new truck, but you can make sure the drivers are driving 65 miles an hour and not increasing wear and tear by harsh braking and harsh accelerating and all of those things. Are you seeing a lot more fleets get serious about that?
I think they're getting serious about data. When you think about how data was used previous to the turmoil that COVID created, is there were certain fleets that could find a use for data and would kind of dive into it, and they'd pick out certain items. But really, I'd say the industry as a whole was drowning in data. They didn't know how to access it. So going through COVID, everybody said, well, it's just what it's going to cost. Everything's going to cost more. And people took their eye off the ball on saving money. It just became, it is what it is, right? Now that we've come out of that and we're going back into a more normal cycle, over the last 24 months, I've seen fleets say, that's it, we need to double down. We need to get back to basics. We need to understand our fuel consumption. We need to understand what we're putting on trucks to maintain them, what the life cycle is, how my decisions in maintenance and fuel affect the total cost of ownership of my truck. And as they start to get into that, it takes them down a path of, you need good, strong data. You need to be able to break it up. I mean, forever, our industries utilize VMRS codes, right? But a lot of fleets didn't utilize that. So you start talking about braking. Well, you have that data coming in from your ELD devices and from your telematics devices telling you what the truck is doing. And then you have maintenance data that's telling you this is the output of what we're seeing. So you're exactly right. Between training, monitoring their data, watching their life cycle, and then creating flexibility to make sure that at the end of the economic life of that truck, you're able to exit it in a good position. Because that's the other thing. I've seen people drown themselves in data and get in there and go, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. They get to the end of it, they realize that 4 or 5 years that the truck should be replaced, but they owe $70,000 on it and they can't get out of it. So finding balance between data, the decisions that you're making, how it impacts your drivers, your total cost of ownership, and then putting yourself in a position where you have the ability in this like 12 to 24 month window when the economic figures line up to replace the piece of equipment or to make a change, you actually have the ability to do that. I mean, that's the holy grail. That's what everybody's trying to get to now. And it's just escalating. People are using the words AI and, that's going to help them. It certainly is. It's going to help them manage data. It's going to help them with better decisions. But this is an industry that we've been trying to move towards predictive maintenance now for what seems like 15 years, right? So I think this is escalating that move. And when you can watch your total life cycle cost and have a proper exit while implementing AI, predictive analytics, all those different components, that everybody is rushing to get to that as the belt starts to tighten in the transportation world again. Well, listen, as we close out here, we just want to thank you for having us on here. Fleet Advantage works really hard to try to make navigating all of these challenges, whether they're regulatory, financial, easy for our customers, and we love to talk about them. We love to hear what other companies are doing in the industry. So thank you for having us.
We'd like to thank FleetOwner for collaborating with us on today's roundtable discussion. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and gained valuable insights into how evolving regulations, lifecycle planning, and total value of ownership continue to shape the future of transportation fleets. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share, like, and leave a review. You can listen to Driver Success on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. You can watch this episode on our social media platforms such as YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and X. Until next time, let's continue to drive solutions together.